Hey, what's up, everyone? I am your host, Sethi.
I am Stylist Rashi Bindra.
Elevated Grapes is a digital media hub that includes a talk show, event correspondence, and digital hosting for partner projects.
The talk show which you are listening to or watching, depending what you're doing, covers topics in fashion, business, and lifestyle.
We regularly have incredible guests that share their stories, their experiences, and tips on the above topics.
And when we don't, you get to hear how we talk to each other off air.
So subscribe to your favorite streaming site, YouTube, and Instagram for behind the scenes and additional visual content.
Let's jump right into the show. Welcome to Elevated Grapes.
This is the Elevated Grapes Podcast.
Elevated Grapes Podcast.
With your host, Seth.
And
Stylist, Rashi Bindra.
It's time to get started.
Let's talk fashion, shall we?
Hairstylist Neil Moodie has been a leading figure in the fashion industry for nearly 3 decades. He was notably a collaborator on some of the 90s most iconic editorial visuals with renowned photographer Corinne at the beginning of his freelance career, which has continued ever since.
He began hairdressing in 1984 and debuted into the world of editorial styling in 1993, working with Corinne on an editorial for the Face magazine. This led to a quick succession of bookings, the first being for Vogue Italia, followed by his first ever advertising campaign for Miu Miu. He is a regular Vogue contributor with over 50 global Vogue covers to his name, and an international ambassador for hair brands such as Aveda and Bumble.
In June 2018, Neil was interviewed for the podcast series Man Talk, hosted by Jamie Day. The series is helping to raise awareness for men's mental health, and Neil discussed, for the first time in public, overcoming his own personal battles with anxiety and depression. This led to doing other interviews and ultimately his own podcast, which is called In Bed with Neil Moodie. Today, Neil still works with some of the most successful and talented personalities in fashion, beauty, film, and the arts. So with that, Neil, welcome to Elevated Grapes.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. So Neil, we're going to jump right in just so we can share your story with our listeners. You built a successful hair artistry sort of brand and business. And that too, you've done it as a freelancer, which is, all the more interesting. So can you talk to us about your journey and how you built that and share that with our audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's obviously, you can imagine it's been a process, and I've been hairdressing actually 37 years this year. Wow. And yeah, I've been a freelance hairstylist for 27 years. So I did my apprenticeship and worked in salons for 10 years, basically. And then I went freelance in 1994, which was through, well, not meeting because we already knew each other, but a photographer friend of mine, Corinne asked me to start working with her. And yeah, I think at the time, I'm one of those people where I don't really kind of overly plan things in terms of my career. I'm quite spontaneous. So if something comes along that seems like a great opportunity, then I'll just sort of take it. I've never really sat down and, been that strategic about it. So even going freelance wasn't necessarily a major plan. But what happened was that Corinne asked me to color a model's hair for her, because I was doing hair color at the time for a shoot that she was doing. And basically the hairstylist who was supposed to do the shoot with her pulled out at the last minute. So because we were friends, she called me and just asked if I wanted to do the shoot with her. And so I just thought, yeah, I'll do it. I'm helping out a friend. And then suddenly the next thing I knew, I had a 12-page shoot in, well, what was the Face magazine. Mm-hmm. And which has actually now relaunched, funnily enough, here in Britain, because it disappeared for a while. But at the time, the Face magazine was huge. And and I, off the back of that, I got booked for Italian Vogue, which is quite unheard of because it was very, I hadn't really gone through the proper channels of working my way up as a freelance hairstylist. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. And I like I say, I'm quite spontaneous, and I just was very like, oh, I've been asked to do Italian Vogue. And wow. course, I was nervous as hell, and they flew me to Milan, and I went and did it. I didn't know what I was doing. I felt like a complete sort of like deer in the headlights, but I just took the opportunity and ran with it. And then when I got back to London, Corinne then asked me if I would work on the Miu Miu campaign with her. And that was my first ever advertising campaign as a freelancer, which again, I didn't really realize the enormity of Miu Miu at the time. It had just started as a diffusion line from Prada. And so nobody really knew how it was going to build. And I think a lot of brands hadn't really started their diffusion line thing at the time. So it was a very, very new concept. But obviously Miu Miu took off and became huge. And so, yes, suddenly it was like, I was thrust into this limelight. But I think there was an element of me where I just sort of was like, okay, let me just see where it goes. And actually I was really lucky because Corinne agreed to be my mentor in a way. And she just said to me, look, Neil, don't go and work with loads of people because lots of people are going to be asking you to work with them. She said, but I think, just take it slowly. You might get approached to join an agency, which I was, and I just kind of kept saying no to everybody. So I just took my time, and I worked mainly with her, and she really sort of nurtured me to the place where I was then ready to, get an agent and start really working properly. And then in 1996, I had the opportunity to move to New York. So again, I took that. And that was when my career really, really exploded when I got to New York. And, I was like suddenly this new kid in town in New York that everybody thought was really cool from London. So I just was like, okay, if that's how you see me, then I'll run with it. And yeah, so like I say, very, very spontaneous. And then I had a great 5.5 years in New York, working there, working for, American Vogue, W magazine, shooting, some great campaigns and things. And yeah, it wasn't really until I started as a freelance hairstylist, you get to sort of, you can get the opportunity to sign a contract with hair brands and work closely with them and become an ambassador for them. And the first brand that I worked for was Aveda, as a freelancer. And then later down the line, I became an ambassador for Bumble and Bumble, which was really the first big contract that I ever had with Bumble and Bumble. And I think I realized at that point sort of how building a brand worked. You know what I mean? Right. Because I'd seen what they'd done with Bumble and Bumble and how they'd sort of turned it from this sort of, small brand but made by hairdressers for the hairdressers, but kind of, it suddenly exploded and become huge. And yeah, I learned a lot from that actually. And then slowly I then went on to work with my now ex-business partner who, and we created a brand called Neil Moodie. And yeah, we both sort of used our expertise. He was not only a hairstylist, but also a distributor of Bumble and Bumble in the UK. And we both decided to sort of leave Bumble and Bumble and start our own brand. And yeah, that was a really great learning curve for me because alongside my freelance job, I was then creating my own brand with somebody, and we did it all from scratch. And like I said, again, it was a massive learning curve because I'd only worked for other brands before, but then to create your own brand, which is going to have your name on it, your face on it, all your ideas behind it, was an amazing opportunity. And again, I just sort of grabbed it by the horns, and I ran with that. But I think with that, because I resigned from that company 3.5 years ago, and actually I learned a lot of things to do, but I also learned a lot of things not to do with that. And, through that process, we created like social media for the brand and everything else. And I started to see how social media worked more, how it could work for you as a business, not just sort of like on a personal, professional career. So, yeah, it was like an interesting process for me. And throughout those processes, I've also had the idea to start my own YouTube channel. And start my own podcast, which was really me. I like it. What I've realized over the years is that I actually like to create a project for myself. So whatever I'm doing, I like to have a side project going on. And and like I say, I've just realized that's what I do all the time. And I think those side projects for me are what excite me and keep me going with everything else that I'm doing, because I think if I get too complacent with something, I almost sort of get bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, it's about not being bored. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And so I entertain my own boredom by creating a new project.
You're preaching to the choir.
Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much what we do over here too.
It sounds exactly like us.
Yeah, but and I think sometimes the projects work, sometimes they don't work as well as others, but I just like the idea of having a project to work on that's a little sideline, and if it takes off, then great, and if it doesn't, then I'll find another one. You know what I mean? But yeah, that's really how it goes for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head there with your last statement there. It's just that you don't know what's going to take off unless you try it. And some of these side projects end up becoming primary projects at some point. And they also, if anything else, they're also complementing, the likelihood is that they're complementing your main craft. And so they're enhancing that by bringing attention from maybe different resources or different audience you may not have had by just the direct methods you were using in the past.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've done other things where, I've created a hat collection with somebody, which was all based on iconic hairstyles over the years. And, and that became sort of like semi-successful, but we never did that as a brand that we planned to build and create like an empire with. It was just like a really nice project to work on that sort of evolved out of being asked to do an editorial. And I was asked to do basically a hair story, a hair shoot, and I'd kind of run out of ideas a little bit hair-wise because it was towards the end of the season. And so I suddenly thought, oh, what about if I create hats that replicate hairstyles, but they are not made of hair? And I was introduced to an amazing hat designer called Flora McLean, and then we worked on this project together. And then we did the shoot, and it came out and it was published. And off the back of that, we suddenly started getting lots of press from it. And in the end, we created 2 or 3 collections, and it ended up, it's in the British Design Museum book, 50 Hats That Changed the World.
That's incredible.
And Stephen Jones, the famous milliner here from Britain, he featured it in one of his exhibitions that he curated where he included other people's hats. And, Philip Tracy was always like really complimentary of the things that we did. And so, and it's funny because for Flora and I, that wasn't necessarily a money-making idea, but it was just a really nice project to work on together. And we created something that actually, has become very iconic in its own way, in terms of, it's been recorded in publications, and applauded by people that we really admire. So sometimes I think the projects don't have to be huge. They can just be
absolutely
enjoyable projects. Do you know what I mean? That you like to do. And like you said, if it's successful, it's successful. If it isn't, it isn't.
Well, also it helps
it's all about creating.
Exactly. I was just going to say the exact same thing. It also feeds your creativity and your creative nature, because a lot of the projects you're likely doing are creative in nature as well, even though they're the offshoots of your primary type of work. So Rashi, I think you might have been leading them the same line, but
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, totally. And what was interesting as well, when I met Flora, she said to me she had no respect for hairdressers whatsoever. So I was like, this is a good... she was like, I was like, this is a good start. But she basically said to me, she'd never had a good haircut, so she didn't really have respect for hairdressers. But I just said to her, you just haven't met good ones.
That is true, probably.
I think that's the bottom line right there. Because when you do meet a good hairdresser, you really understand what it, even I'm just thinking as a guy too, like when someone does wonders with your hair, like, oh my goodness, like I didn't even know that could happen with my hair.
Totally. Guys, just to interrupt you, my video has stopped, and it's just said to me that my phone storage is full.
That's all right.
That's
so you know
okay.
what? We'll take a quick break on that note. We're chatting with Neil, who has, for our listeners who maybe didn't catch it in the beginning, over 50 global Vogue covers. So we're going to continue to hear his story and his journey. You want to definitely stay tuned for this. This is Elevated Grapes. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, it's your host Sethi. Don't forget that you can catch us every Saturday on Ruckus Avenue Radio and the dashradio.com app at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the live newest episodes of Elevated Grapes. We'll see you then. Cheers.
And everybody, welcome back to Elevated Grapes. We are talking with global artist Neil. And Neil, we were just chatting about how, one photo shoot led you to Vogue Italia and led this huge explosion of a dream come true, which I'm sure that everyone who is listening to their like jaws are dropping. But did you always wanted to be a hair artist? Like, did you knew since you were a kid that I want to play with hair and I want to get into this world?
No, funny enough. I mean, I remember when I was at school, we had, I don't know if I'm sure you'd have something similar in the US or whatever, but we have careers advisors.
Yes.
And you would go and see them and they were like, what do you want to do? And I always think it's weird, like how at like 12, 13 years old, do you know what you want to do when you're an adult?
I don't know what I want to do now.
No, me neither. That's the thing. I mean, I don't know what I want to do next week. So exactly. I kind of, but I remember saying I wanted to be a journalist, and that was my, my thing. I was like, yeah, I want to be a journalist. And he went to speak to my English teacher, and her and I were not, well, I wouldn't say, let's just say we didn't really see eye to eye. She always used to say I didn't concentrate enough, and she basically told him that I didn't have the concentration to study to become a journalist. And I remember being so peed off that she'd said that I then was like, right, okay. So they were like, okay, Neil, what else are you going to do? And I was like, well, that was what I wanted to do. And she's just crushed that as an idea. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, okay, what can I do that would just really annoy everybody? And it was the 80s. We were all doing our hair and coloring our hair and experimenting and wearing makeup and that kind of thing. And I just was like, I'm going to be a hairdresser because I know everybody will be really against that. So again, it was, like I say, it was a bit of a spontaneous thing. And I said to my parents I wanted to be a hairstylist. My father freaked out because he wanted me to carry on studying. I was pretty smart at school. I wasn't like, the dumbest kid on the block, but I had no patience for school anymore. I was like, she'd crushed everything for me. And I was like, what is the point of like staying if they're not going to support you? Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was where it came about. And so in the end, I stuck with that so much. My mother and my father actually decided to support me because I wouldn't let it go as an idea. And it was funny because, like I say, my father wasn't really into it, but he realized I wasn't going to let it go. And we figured out the best channel for me to do. I mean, I remember going for interviews at hair beauty school, or what you guys call beauty school, the equivalent here. And then I was going to salons and things and trying to do an apprenticeship. And I was trying to figure out which was the best route to take. And so I decided in the end it was better to do an apprenticeship because I like the idea of being a bit more hands-on. And so, yeah, that's what I did, but it was not planned at all. And actually, I would say, if I'm really, really honest, my first year, I wasn't that great. But I think it was because I was also very nervous. I was quite quiet as a kid. I wasn't like that extroverted. My sister was more the extrovert one, and I was the real introvert. And I think it just took me a long time to come out of my shell. But I failed my first year of my apprenticeship. So but it was more out of nerves than anything else. I remember we would have final tests and everything, and I just failed pretty much everything. But what was great was I remember the guy who I worked for, the salon I worked for, he said to me, Neil, I know you're better than this, so I'm going to give you the chance to move on. We're going to forget what just happened. And so, we're going to stick with you. And thank God he did, because I then carried on and here I am hundreds of years later.
That's amazing.
That's such an important part of your story, because I think a lot of times you do have people that are very good at their craft, and for whatever reason, maybe it was, like you said, nerves in your situation, a specific circumstance that didn't allow them to perform at their peak when they needed to. And they, and unfortunately in that situation, they get cut off. Now, obviously you still showed something, even if you felt like you didn't perform your best, you still showed something enough for someone to say, you know what, there's something here with this person, and we want to see it through. We want to give them that chance because we feel and believe in what they do. So I think that's a really important part of your journey and your story.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like all along I've been believed by people, you know what I mean? Right. Like that Corinne, who worked with me, she believed in me as a hairstylist, Eve, and she took a chance, but obviously I was trained and everything at that point, but I hadn't entered the freelance world, which is a very different world to salon work. But she saw something in me and believed in me and encouraged me. And I think, sometimes it's important to try and spot those things in people, because obviously now I'm a lot older. I'm doing that with, guys that come and work for me and assist me and that kind of thing. And, I'm also planning to open a salon here in London at the moment. And, it's kind of finding the people where you see something in them. Which is eventually going to happen through the process of, interviewing people and, looking for staff, basically. But I think there's an element of me that kind of, I love the underdog a bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. I totally see that.
Yeah,
I think it's
the whole Rocky vibe.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, it's the full Rocky vibe. Go for the underdog.
That's it.
So
you mentioned something that's interesting, and I think there's a bit of this debate in this world is salon versus freelance or non-salon work. So what's your thoughts on someone who is, say, for example, in the salon world and has thought about what you're doing or thought about freelancing or doing other types of work outside of salon? Is it a transition that's easily doable, or is it something that's takes a special niche or kind of artist to do?
I think it's become easier than it used to be, because thanks to social media, people can show their work off, whereas when I first started in the 90s, we didn't have those kind of platforms, so it was almost a bit more niche and almost a bit elitist in that respect. But I do think there is a massive difference between salon work and freelance work. And I think a lot of the sort of younger people that are coming up at the moment who try and make that transition, some of them try to make it too quickly and they don't understand what it entails to be freelance. I mean, and I experienced this in the beginning, because when you go on a shoot in a salon, you're taught to cut hair. There's a lot less styling of hair. It's more about the cutting and the technique of cutting and being able to cut, because that's what people come for, unless they come for a blowout. But generally that's what you're trained to do. And then the blow dry is just to finish off your haircut, really. Whereas in the freelance world, it's the opposite. It's all about styling hair, and you actually only do haircuts every now and again when somebody needs one, or you've decided you're going to give them a haircut for the shoot. And I think that's where a lot of people trip up, because they see shoots in magazines or online and they kind of go, oh, I can do that. But, getting from A to Z with somebody's hair, when you've only got the opportunity to style it, you can't give them a haircut. You're not allowed to, or they're refusing to get a haircut. And so you've got to work with what's in front of you.
What's in front of you, yeah. It's
very hard if you can't then create what you need to get from A to Z. You know what I mean? And this is one of the things that I always try and teach all the guys that assist me and everything. I'm like, learn your craft, because it's really important. You have no idea what's going to be sat in front of you. 2 days before the shoot, you don't know who the model's going to be. You don't know who the hair's going to be like, what their hair's going to be like. You don't know what type of hair they will have. And obviously these shoots are thought out in advance, and a lot of the times they'll sort of like send you a mood board and be like, this is what we're thinking. And you've somehow got to turn this person into the vision that everybody's thinking, including your own, but it's got to work with the rest of the shoot too. And I think this is the other thing where a lot of young hairstylists trip up, is that they come on a shoot and for them it's just all about the hair, whereas actually it's not. It's a very small part of the process. It's a collaboration of a group of people, and you've all actually got to work together and create a person, a look that goes with the clothes, that goes with the makeup, that goes with the sets, that goes with the lighting. You know what I mean? And and this is where I think a lot of young guys trip up, is that they come in going, it's all about the hair. You can create the most amazing hair, but if it doesn't go with everything else, it's not going to work.
It doesn't work.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. You've kind of then got to really think on your feet and go, okay, that hair doesn't work. What am I going to do instead?
Right.
And if you don't know your craft,
you can't.
You're stuck.
Yeah.
You know, and I think now as well with like diversity and everything, and you know, the fact that the whole fashion and beauty industry is opened up to diversity as well, there is a real sort of like lack of people, say for example, who can't do type 4 hair, because they haven't trained for it or they haven't taught themselves how to look after it. And so it creates problems because you can't turn up and say, sorry, I can't do this person's hair because I've not been trained in this hair type.
That's not, that doesn't look good at all.
Well, you'll be sent home.
Well, that's just
bottom line, because you're expected to be able to do any type of hair and create whatever you need. Also, you know, you need to be able to do wigs, because if you can't create on somebody's hair what you need to do, you then got to think of an alternative, which could possibly doing a wig. So you need to learn about, you know, things like doing a wig wrap, putting a wig on, making the wig look good, you know, styling a wig, which is totally different to somebody's real hair.
Somebody's actual hair.
So yeah, my thing is, I just say learn your craft. Don't just sort of go, oh, I can do that, because you know, there's a lot of shoots where people see the hair and it's quite natural and they kind of go, oh God, that looks easy. But the bottom line is that that model might not necessarily have walked in with hair like that.
Right. Right.
You know, they can walk in with type 4 hair that's like really, really tight curls. And then you've somehow, you know, they might go, oh, we want her to look a bit like Kate Moss. And you're like, okay, she doesn't have Kate Moss type hair. Yeah. But you got to somehow make that work. And if you don't know how to do it, like I say, you'll be sent home. So I always say to people, just don't be in a rush, you know. Learn the craft and learn it well, and practice at home and try out different things, and learn styling, because it's like 10% cutting and 90% styling.
Wow, this is we're actually learning a lesson for non-hairstylists. Just a little bit about the world that you're in right now. This is great.
I can totally see exactly what you're saying, because this is like, we had a very recent conversation in a photo shoot like just last week, and it was the same thing that you said. Everyone's component is like, you know, 10%, 10%, but it's everything that brings that final image together. It is the makeup, it's the hair, it's even the photo, it's the clothes, everything. So we're all coming together to create that final product. And if everybody knows their craft really well, then how can you not have an amazing final image? Right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Totally. You're as weak as your weakest link at the end of the day, right? So if someone has the craft down, then you know, the whole product or the end result is not gonna shine the way it's supposed to.
Exactly. As the woman who presented the weakest link said, you are the weakest link. Goodbye. You are the
weakest. So we're gonna take a quick break right there. We are chatting with Neil, international global hair artist, and as he says, it's not always all about the hair. So we're going to come back to him and talk to him a little bit more and continue learning about his journey. This is Elevated Grapes.
Hey everybody, this is Stylist Rashipindra, and if you like what you hear, hit subscribe and follow us on all your favorite streaming sites, on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok. Like, just type in Elevated Grapes and you will find us.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We are talking to global hair artist and superstar Neil. And one of the things in our conversation was about spotting potential. Neil, you know, you said that you got very lucky that people saw that in you, and that's how a lot of things was happening for you, and the chances that like you were given, and that's how it helped you work on your craft as well. Now, when you have assistants, is that how you bring them on board too? Like, do you see the potential in like other people and help them build their craft? Like how's that process now for you at this stage of your career?
Yeah, I mean, obviously when somebody comes to assist you, when they become like what you would call your first assistant, it's like a bit of a full-time job really. And actually there's a few things. I don't take anybody on that's too young. So I like people that have had at least sort of 5, 6, 7 years experience in a salon, because actually when they've done that, they've had experience of just working with different hair types on a daily basis. If somebody's too young, they lack that experience in a way, you know, of just experiencing putting your fingers into different hair types and seeing how it is. But there's also a few other things I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody that doesn't have too much of an ego, because not because I have one and I don't want them to overshadow it, but a lot of this job is about actually, when you walk into a studio or on location, you need to be able to leave your ego at the door. And because, like we were saying earlier, it's a collaboration of people working together. And if somebody comes in with a very big ego, then it makes it a lot harder to work as a collaborative. So I try and find people that are confident but without ego. And then after that, really, it's also, I'm looking for somebody that's quite conscientious. Which is also hard to figure out until they actually come to work with you, whether they think on their feet a little bit, because sometimes you can be in a situation where you have to make quite snap decisions, or you, like, for example, the shoot I was on today, we did like 5 hair changes throughout the day. And, I need whoever's working alongside me to kind of almost second guess what I'm going to need before I need it, which they don't always get right, but they can they're just sort of looking at what you're doing and thinking, oh, he's probably going to need this now and he's probably going to need that, and I'll hand him this product or give him, or even go, do you want this product or this product, because I think these are the 2 you might need. Because ultimately they are there to help the process move along.
Yes.
But also they're there to learn as well. I mean, I think one of the great things is that when you can find an assistant that's also willing to learn, the worst is, which again comes to do with leaving your ego outside, because if they come in being very kind of like, oh yeah, well, I know what that is. And, and I've had this before with people where you'll be doing the hair and they go, well, I wouldn't do it like that. I'd do it like this. And I just go, well, off you go then. If you can do it better than I can, then show me how it's done.
Yeah.
And then obviously they struggle, and then you're like, well, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing and why you're doing what you're doing, because I've got more experience. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to learn off anybody that wants to teach me something new. But when that ego gets in the way of them thinking they can do it better than you, that's a problem. So, and again, like I say, sometimes that's quite hard to gauge, excuse me, when you interview somebody for the position. I mean, I have interviewed people and they've started, and 3 months down the line, I'm like, oh no, this isn't working. But I'm quite good at just sort of stopping it in its tracks very quickly. If I think it's not working, or I don't feel like me and that person are gelling very well, or they're, like I say, they just have too much of an ego to be able to assist and let that go. It's nice to find people that just feel like they want to learn. I still feel myself, like I say, I'm happy if someone wants to teach me something about hair that I don't know about. When I was in my 40s and I was creating my old brand, and we did electrical tools, and they were made in Korea, and I actually went to Korea to visit the factory, and they had a school there where they would teach people how to use the tools that they made. And there was this amazing woman there who was in her 60s, and she was one of the teachers, and she was doing things with curling irons I'd never seen before in my life. Wow. And so when I came back to London, I said I wanted to go back and spend a week training with her. And everyone was like, are you mad? Like, what do you need to do that for? And I was like, well, she can do things I can't, or things I've not seen before. And I want to go and learn that. And actually, I went back to Korea and I spent a whole week with her. She didn't speak English. I don't speak Korean. And we had the best time. We laughed a lot, even though we didn't understand each other. But even she was like, I think this is through my interpreter. She was like, I think it's amazing that you were prepared to come and learn something at your stage in your career. I mean, then I was in my early 40s, and I just said to her, well, you do things with these irons that I've never seen before, and I want to know how to do it. And I think, that's invaluable things that you should do along the way. If you see something and you're like, I want to know how to do that, take yourself out and go and do it. I don't think, I've always said, if I get to the point where I just think I'm so good, I don't ever want to learn anything ever again, that's when I'll probably quit.
Well, I think that's important there, right?
Well said, though, yeah.
You said, you said a couple of really important things there. Skill set is important, but if there's a personality and fit challenge between yourself and the people you're working with, it could be your team or it could be your assistants, then it's never going to work, because no matter what's going to happen, the end product's going to show that there was some, it wasn't as cohesive as it could have been, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so
Yeah.
even as a student coming in, they could know great things, but I think it's also respectfully how it's presented to you. Like if you're sort of bringing them on as an assistant, and yes, they see something that maybe potentially, whether it's true or not, could help. The way that in which they approach it, and the way in which they bring it to your attention also goes a long way, because then from your perspective, okay, this person, they're willing to take initiative, and they have enough courage to bring it to my attention, because sometimes it's intimidating if you're working with someone who has that sort of reputation, and if they're able to even bring it to you in a respectful manner, I think that would also go a long way with you, right? And
Yeah.
because if they're doing it again respectfully, and they're not there to be like, to have the egotistical side of it, or to be a jackass about it, but they're saying, hey, like, I've thought about this, and maybe it's a conversation you guys can have about if it can work or not. But I think that goes a long way, because fit, to me, and that's in any environment, in any partnership, if fit is not there, then it's just, no matter how good they are, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and it's the same, like you said, even not with assistants, even just the people that, you work alongside. If you're not getting on, or, I even say sometimes, you can work with people and just your taste levels are very different. And so when you try and put your taste level together with theirs, sometimes it just doesn't work, and a lot of stuff about fashion and beauty is all about taste. And funny enough, I always say to my assistant, you can't teach taste.
No.
It's either you have it or you don't.
Yeah. And also what I think might be bad taste, other people might think is great taste. Which in one respect is great, because it shows if we all have the same taste, then things would be pretty boring.
Yeah, of course.
But and it's funny, there's a word that's bantered around tons in fashion where they're like, oh, that's really cool, you're really cool, they're really cool. What's cool is what you think is cool.
Yeah. It's subjective, right?
It's totally subjective, and when I say, oh, I think that's really cool, it doesn't mean to say that somebody else does, but it's good to have your own opinions, I think, of things, and like I say, what I think's cool can be cool, and other people do too. But I also have learned the fact that other people might not think what I think's cool is.
Yeah.
So and then you work with those people and it doesn't work out, then I'm respectful of, like, what, our creative juices didn't collide and create a nice juice. So
That
it was a
smoothie
bit,
did not work out.
no, it was a bit on the sour side.
that was not a good shake at all.
No, or as they say, it had a rotten apple in it.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Neil, I'm going to take the conversation to a slightly personal note, and this topic does hit close to home for us even. So you have bravely spoken very openly about your battles with mental health, especially anxiety and depression. Could you share with us, when did you realize you were struggling with anxiety and depression, and how did you overcome it? And I know that with this industry, it is especially a bit more challenging than other industries. So if you don't mind talking about your journey on that, I think that would be really great for our listeners and maybe helpful too.
Yeah, sure. I'm super happy to talk about it, because actually, since I've started talking about it, it's been amazing to see and hear how it's helped other people, which is one of the reasons why I eventually succumbed to not keeping everything to myself. But funny enough, I'd say from about the age of 13, 14, I suffered from what is now known as anxiety. But I didn't know at the time. I just used to feel a bit weird or a bit strange. And, my parents used to put some of it down to me just being a teenager and growing up and being a bit weird. But I remember when I first moved to London when I was 18 years old, and I moved to London with my then partner. And I mean, we broke up like a year after we got here, and I was suddenly felt very alone in London. And I started to have anxiety attacks when I was going to work, like on what we call the tube, the underground. And again, I just didn't know what was going on. I was like, this is so weird. And I'd have to get off. And I felt like, I was out of breath, and my palms were sweaty. And it was funny because I just sort of, somebody said to me, oh, you're probably having like a bit of a panic attack. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. But I think as I settled down again, I sort of was like, okay, and I found some new friends and, you know, started to make my life properly in London. Then it sort of manifested again a little bit in my mid-20s. But that was more sort of after my freelance career started to take off. But I think some of it was the anxiety of what I was taking on. And as I mentioned earlier, I was sort of thrown in at the deep end a little bit. But I just was like, oh, I'll be fine, you know, and didn't really do anything about it. But when it really took hold was when I hit my 30s. And I'd actually at that point had moved to New York, was living in New York. As I mentioned again earlier, my career really took off in New York. You know, it was suddenly, you know, I was being thrust into, you know, all these jobs that everybody was like, oh my God, you're doing American Vogue. Oh my God, you're working for W. This is amazing, you know. And I realized that I was just saying yes to every single job that was coming along. I was traveling like crazy. Every week I was on a plane, off a plane. And, you know, on paper, and when you say it to other people, they're like, oh, you're so lucky. It's such a, you know, glamorous lifestyle, or, you know, a jet set lifestyle. Trust me, A, it's not glamorous.
It's not.
It really isn't. And B, I don't know what jet set means, but it didn't feel very jet set when I was not feeling great. But yeah, and I think what it was that in my head, I was like, I'm actually not dealing with this very well, but everybody else was telling me this is amazing. You know, you're getting all these amazing opportunities. But I think it was this clash that I was having in my head about like, I'm doing really well. Everyone's saying it's amazing. I feel like crap. And it wasn't the work that was making me feel like crap. It was just the pace of everything. And like I say, I was saying yes to every single job. I didn't have days off for weeks in a row, but I was getting on planes, off planes, trying to deal with jet lag, getting up, you know, having had no sleep and going to work. And suddenly it was like I was hit by, you know, a truck. And my brain just was like, you know what, we're done. And it completely shut down. And I happened to be in London actually, but I had the most huge anxiety attack. Where I sort of what they call like desensitization. I didn't know where I was. I barely knew, just about remembered my name and where I lived. And I had to go home, and I didn't sleep for like a week. I mean, it was awful. And I remember just thinking, oh my God, I think I'm going a bit crazy.
Yeah.
I cancelled the work that I had, which of course everyone was like, you can't do that, you know, but I was like, but I feel really terrible. And luckily for me, two of my friends, really old friends of mine, came over to see me, and they were like, Neil, we think you need to go and see somebody, because I'd actually become agoraphobic as well. I didn't want to go out the side because I was so nervous of maybe having another attack at, you know, on the street and being stuck. This was before the days of mobile phones. So, you know, I didn't have a mobile phone. And so you kind of think, well, once I'm out the door, that's it. I'm on my own, literally. And luckily for me, they took me to my doctor. They said, come on, let's take you to see somebody. And my doctor was amazing. And he was like, I think I know what's going on, but I want to get you assessed. And he sent me to a psychiatrist who I spent 2 hours with, chatting about how I was feeling, what was going on. And he basically said to me, you're suffering from anxiety and mild depression. He said, and I think we need to reprogram your brain into, he said, what's happened is you feel like you have no control over it. It's kind of taken over. Anxiety, and he explained it to me about, you know, how it's adrenaline, you're producing adrenaline in your body and it's pumping around your system. But when the anxiety is so heightened, it's like extreme anxiety, the adrenaline is just overproducing, and then your brain just goes into this, it basically can't deal with the amount of adrenaline you're producing. So yeah, I was very lucky. He sent me to a specialist who specialized in anxiety. She was a therapist, but that was her speciality. And they also put me onto medication. So at the time, Prozac was the drug of the moment. So that was what they put me on. And to try and lift me out of this depression as well, that I sort of dived into completely unexpectedly. And actually it worked. I mean, you know, you do take a pill and go, okay, am I meant to feel great? But it doesn't happen that quickly. And it actually took about 4 months before excuse me, before I really started to feel a bit more, for want of a better word, normal. I was having therapy every week. The Prozac had sort of kicked in and was leveling off my serotonin levels and making, my mood was lifted. But actually, I didn't travel again. I went back to work after 4 months, and I didn't start traveling again for about 8 months, because I was like, I don't want to get on a plane. I don't want to get on a train. I don't want to go anywhere strange,
You want to give yourself time to adjust and adapt, because there's a fear in just being in that situation again in an area that you're not familiar with.
Absolutely. And actually, I remember my very first trip going abroad was to Paris, and I actually called my father and said, "Will you come with me?" And he came with me. I was very lucky. My father was very supportive of it, because when he was younger, my father had 2 nervous breakdowns, so he'd gone through a very similar thing. He was a lot more ill than I ever became, but he was amazing, because he was so supportive and understood what I was going through, and came with me to Paris for the first job that I did away, and which was amazing. But it got to a point where it was like, I can't keep traveling with my father everywhere. But it was a question of building up my confidence and also learning how to deal with the anxiety, really. But I've always said, since I've started talking about it, which has been like openly, which has been for about 3 years now, that for me, anxiety and depression, it's a bit like a dimmer switch, but you don't have your fingers on the controller. You're not the person. You can't turn it up and down, or you can't turn it off. And I would say, realistically, for me, it's still an ongoing process. I'm on a different medication now, because I've been on medication ever since, but over the years things have changed, things have become more sophisticated. But I'm on a very low dose, but it's actually what helps me stay sort of quite stable and normalized. And I've fought against it, I'll be honest with you, with the medication at times. I've been to my doctor, I don't want to take tablets anymore, and he's like, but Neil, they make you deal with your life, and he likened it to, if you had a heart condition and I said you take these tablets every day and your heart will be normal, what would you do? And I said, well, I'll take them. He said, so why can't you do it with this? And what it was, I realized, was all the stigma around mental health, and the stigma around male mental health that goes on. And that's why I decided to start talking about it, because I think now I'm in my 50s, early 50s. I think I have a much better understanding of it. I know my limits, my levels. I also, if I can feel anxiety coming on, I have a lot more kind of like, methods that I can turn to calm it down and manage it. And so I felt like I could talk about it. And I thought, even if it just helps one person, then great. And actually, the first time I talked about it was on a podcast, which was not my podcast. It was a podcast somebody else was doing, called Man Talk, which is a really lovely guy called Jamie Day, who's my friend's husband. And I heard he was starting this podcast because he suffers quite badly from depression. And he basically wanted to raise awareness for men's mental health, and decided to start interviewing people from all different walks of life, guys only, about their mental health and how they had coped with it, dealt with it, and how they deal with it now.
Great idea.
And I heard that he was doing it, and I contacted his wife, who's a friend of mine, and I said, listen, I've never told you this before, but this is what I've been through, and if Jamie would like me to be a guest, I'm happy to come talk about it. Wow. And luckily for me, he jumped at the chance, and that's really what got the ball rolling about me having the conversation regularly.
Neil, thank you so much for sharing that. It's quite a personal topic, obviously, but I think, as you mentioned, both here and in previous interviews, it's an important one to discuss, especially for men's mental health, where, now it's becoming slowly more open and acceptable to talk about. For the longest time, it wasn't, but it's because people like you that have been through it and are willing to share and say, hey, it's okay to discuss these things and share it, because, navigating through it is not easy. So it's very important. So thank you for that. We're going to take a quick break right now. We are chatting with Neil. He's an international global hair artist, and we're lucky enough to have him on this show. We're going to take a quick break and then come wrap up as soon as we're done with that. Thank you. And this is Elevated Grapes.
Hey guys, it's your host Sethi. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Elevated Grapes. Cheers, and let's continue the show.
Hi everyone, I'm Stylist Rashid Bindra. Do not forget to follow us on Instagram as Elevated Grapes and show some love.
So everybody, welcome back. We are talking to Neil, a global hair artist, and right before the break, we were discussing his personal battle with anxiety and depression. And Neil, you know what? I've I would love your thoughts on this. I've noticed a lot of creative people, and I don't know if this is an industry thing or just creative people in general, all sorts of artists, all sorts of creatives, even actors. They always suffer from some sort of mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, nervousness, bipolar disorder. Do you, from your input or your insight, do you feel it's something to do with just how artists are in general, or like do we see things differently, or we just happen to meet each other and we suffer from anxiety or depression?
It's a very interesting question, because I think there's an element of, when you're a creative and maybe your career is reaching a point where you're becoming more successful, I feel like there's an element of being creative that is like you're giving a performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with every performance comes anxiety of some description. And because you also put high expectations on yourself to perform, because you want people to enjoy what you do, like what you do, you want to be praised for what you've done. I think, anybody creative ideally wants somebody to go, that's amazing, you know what I mean? And in whatever capacity it is. So I think that generates anxiety. But it's a hard one, because, having talked a lot about sort of male mental health as well, and anxiety and depression as a male, it's becoming more and more apparent that actually a lot of men are suffering from it who are not creative at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big thing here at the moment in the UK, where they've actually found out, that's a lie, sorry, they found out that a huge amount of men in construction are suffering from anxiety but don't talk about it, or haven't been talking about it.
Wow.
And and they think a lot of it is because their work is, strangely for other people, quite pressurized.
Yes.
They work into a lot of time constraints and are being, forced to get things moving very quickly. But then when they go home, being male, they're expected to be this sort of dominant male figure,
Yes.
who, is in control, looks after everybody, especially if there's, more women in the household than men. They're expected to be this sort of alpha male character.
Mm-hmm.
But underneath it all, they're all suffering because they are trying to deal with the stress of their work. So I'm actually not convinced it's just creatives anymore. I think it's across the board, with people that just, whatever they do, are starting to feel pressurized about how they perform. Because I think, even say, for example, a construction worker, when he goes to work, he's expected to perform to a certain level and a certain standard.
Right.
Absolutely.
And if they don't, then they can be fired, they could lose their job, which then means, they have to go home and tell their families, I've been fired, I've lost my job, there's no income, you know what I mean? And so I actually think a lot of it, and one of the reasons why it's escalating more as well, is the pressures of everyday life in our current society, and I definitely think you're right. As for creative people, it's a big thing. It definitely is. I can't totally put my finger on what that is, but I think, what I mentioned is sort of touching on it a little bit about the performance side, and wanting, it's almost like you want approval, you want appraisal for what you do. I know I want to do hair and people go, oh, I love that hair that you did. If somebody goes, the hair's all right, I mean, I'd be really upset. And it would probably cause me anxiety because of that. So it is this performance thing. But like I say, I think that crosses the board actually these days a lot more into other professions as well. I don't think it's just tied to creatives.
I think as you mentioned, like, I think on the creative side is because your work is so visible and it's so easily available to be judged, and it automatically puts a little bit of that high level stress. But then outside of that, non-creative industries and anything that to me is high stress and or high performance based, whatever the industry is, you're gonna have someone who's in that role, or person who's able to function that level also is is the kind of person who likes or can feel that they can manage and take on high stress or high performance levels. So they could be, like you mentioned, they could be the provider in their home. They could be always the go-to person in their family. But it's always going to be this person taking care of it. That's probably why they have that role at work too, because they, they're seen as that go-to person. But when you're functioning like that across all different aspects of your life, that can become a very easy situation to be cause for anxiety and or depression or other sort of mental illnesses. And obviously it's only isolated to these type of individuals, but you could see why or how that happens more commonly in someone who is like that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, like you said, in the creative world, we're open to more scrutiny because when you produce work and it goes out for the world to see, especially with the internet now, where anybody can see it and anybody can comment.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, literally, the world and its wife feels they have to say something about everything you've done.
Literally, insane.
Yeah, totally. And, it's all up for scrutiny, basically. And some people love it and other people hate it. Yeah. And, I mean, what's really funny? I've got to tell you this story. I was watching TV yesterday morning. So there's this really quite famous TV presenter here, female, who's quite British, she's Swedish, but, has lived in Britain for years. And she was always seen as a bit of a sort of sexy woman when she was younger, all the guys loved her and everything. She's just posted this picture of herself naked with Wellington boots on, but obviously she sort of blanked out her sort of, private nether regions. Right. But supposedly she posted it about, it was about raising awareness for men's mental health. I can't remember the exact story about why she did this picture, but it was because she'd seen something with a load of men who had exposed their bums and whatever. And she thought it'd be quite funny to do the same, but she was really doing it to raise awareness. She got slammed so badly on social media because they were like, what are you doing? This is like ridiculous. This is, it's so bad for women. And actually they had her being interviewed on TV and she said, I only ever did this to raise awareness. She said, and I've had all this backlash, people, trolling me, blah, 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 blah. But they said to her, how do you feel about it? And she said, the main thing is most of the stuff was positive. And she said, I'd say only about 10% of it was negative. And she said, the thing is with somebody like me who's in the public eye, you have to focus on the positive and blank out the negative. And I think that's what you have to do when you're a creative person, is blank out the negative responses that people might have to your work. Because when you listen to them, it causes more anxiety because it starts niggling away,
Absolutely.
And focus on the positive.
Neil, thank you for sharing your insight on that. We unfortunately we do have to wrap up given the time constraints here. But before we end off, we'd like to ask you to share your socials, your websites, anywhere people can continue to follow your journey and continue to see your work and follow your story.
Sure. My Instagram is at Neil Moodie, Moodie with an IE, because people always put a Y on the end. My YouTube channel is also Neil Moodie, the same. And yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. I'm Neil Moodie everywhere. Apart from on Twitter, I'm at the Neil Moodie, because there was already a Neil Moodie who took my handle.
No,
he could take the handle. Like you're still the Neil Moodie. He can take it, but
exactly. Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, he took the wrong handle.
Yeah. He lost it. Totally. He lost that. Well, the funny thing is, he has a thing on his Twitter account that says, I am not the hairdresser, which I think is really funny.
Oh my goodness.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That speaks volumes about you.
Yeah. And the other thing is my podcast is In Bed with Neil Moodie.
Nice. Perfect. Yeah. So definitely for our listeners. Yeah, absolutely. It's great. Definitely check it out. And I'm assuming it's on Spotify, Apple Music, and all the streaming sites.
Everywhere. Yeah.
So jump in bed with Neil Moodie and learn more about him through his podcast. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time. Your story is incredible. Thank you for and sharing it and being so open on the personal side as well. I think these kind of conversations are what's really important for our listeners.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Elevated Grapes. We will catch you next week. Hey guys, thank you for watching that podcast or that video. If you like what you hear and you want to hear more of us and see some of our behind the scenes stuff, subscribe below.
Yes, hit that little red button thingy that's over there and hit subscribe and keep following us for a lot more cool fun stuff.
Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you soon. Hey, what's up everyone? I am your host Sethi.
I am Stylist Rashi Bindra.
Elevated Grapes is a digital media hub that includes a talk show, event correspondence, and digital hosting for partner projects.
The talk show which you are listening to or watching, depending what you're doing, covers topics in fashion, business, and lifestyle.
We regularly have incredible guests that share their stories, their experiences, and tips on the above topics.
And when we don't, you get to hear how we talk to each other off air.
So subscribe to your favorite streaming site, YouTube, and Instagram for behind the scenes and additional visual content.
Let's jump right into the show. Welcome to Elevated Grapes.